They came from the stars, not in peace, not with curiosity, but with arrogance, with fleets that blotted out the sun and weapons that tore apart moons like paper. The Galactic Dominion declared war on Earth, and the universe held its breath, because every other species knew what that meant. When the Dominion declares war, civilizations vanish, worlds burn, names become dust in the stellar wind, but this time the Dominion didn't understand what they were up against. Because this time, they declared war on humanity. The first contact wasn't a moment of glory or wonder. It wasn't that cinematic scene of humans standing on a hill as a shining saucer descends from the heavens. No, when the sky broke open over Mars, it wasn't beauty that came through. It was fire. It was fear. It was the sound of something far greater than us saying, "You don't belong here." But here's the thing about humanity: we've never belonged anywhere. Not comfortably, not peacefully. We've always had to fight for every inch of progress we've ever made. And that's what made the first battle so different. It wasn't just humans versus aliens. It was the same old story we've lived for centuries. Humanity standing against something bigger, stronger, and more certain than us, and refusing to give in. The aliens came with ships that could fold light itself. They came with technology that made our satellites look like toys. They believed the war would be over before it began. They expected submission, or at least negotiation. But they didn't understand what drives us. They didn't understand that humans only truly wake up when someone tells us we can't do something. Think about that for a second. Not in a galactic sense, but in a daily one. Every time someone said you weren't smart enough, strong enough, or worthy enough, didn't it ignite something inside you? That spark, that silent whisper, "Watch me." That's the same fire that lit every cockpit, every bunker, every human heart the day the sky fell. The same fire that's burned in us since we crawled out of caves and looked up at the stars wondering, what's next? When the first alien fleet appeared, the governments of Earth didn't have a plan. There was no interstellar defense force, no shining hero with alien tech, no miracle weapon waiting in a lab. What we had were engineers working overtime, scientists skipping meals, and soldiers looking up at the night sky, knowing they were probably going to die. And still, they showed up. Not because they were fearless, but because they were human. That's the power the aliens didn't understand. We don't fight because we expect to win. We fight because we can't imagine not trying. Our ships weren't sleek. They weren't powered by antimatter or shielded by quantum fields. They were metal coffins powered by fire and fuel, patched together with duct tape, sweat, and the stubbornness of people who refused to give up. The first human counterattack on Mars was led not by the most advanced machines, but by people with grace on their hands and hope in their hearts. They weren't gods, they weren't even ready. They were us, imperfect, emotional, tired, but alive. And when that first dreadnought exploded, when that massive alien warship, covered in armor forged in the heart of dying stars, was ripped apart by a human missile guided by a pilot who hadn't slept in 3 days, the universe blinked. For the first time, someone stood up to the unstoppable. For the first time, a voice rose out of the chaos and said, "We don't care what you think is possible." You see, that moment wasn't about war. It was about identity, about what it means to be human. Because that same spirit lives in every small act of resistance in our everyday lives. It's the student who studies through the night despite being told they'll never make it. It's the mother who raises her children alone and still finds time to smile. It's the worker who keeps going after failure, who shows up day after day even when the world feels impossible. That's the same spirit that turned the tide on Mars. The aliens didn't lose that first battle because we had better weapons. They lost because they didn't understand what happens when humanity is cornered. We don't crumble, we create, we adapt. We fight dirty, we fight smart, and most of all, we fight together. When the aliens jammed our communications, we used Morse code and memes. When they blocked our satellites, we painted messages on mountains. When they tried to break our spirit, we laughed. And that laughter carried through the static like thunder. Because that's who we are. When the world burns, we find humor. When the odds crush us, we find courage. When the sky falls, we build wings. And isn't that what we do in our daily lives too? Every setback, every heartbreak, every rejection, it feels like the universe declaring war on us. But we adapt, we improvise. We throw everything we have, even if it's not much, because it's not about the odds. It's about the fight. It's about standing tall. Even when everything around you is falling apart. The day the sky broke wasn't humanity's darkest day. It was the day we remembered who we are. It was the day we realized that the stars don't belong to anyone. They're there for those who dare to reach. The aliens came with their perfect order and endless rules, and they thought that made them strong. But strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from struggle, from scars, from the ability to fall 1,000 times and still get up one more. And that's what makes us dangerous. Not our technology, not our weapons, but our hearts. Because a heart that's been broken and keeps beating is unstoppable. A mind that's been told, you can't, and whispers, watch me, is unbreakable. So when the first contact became the first war, humanity didn't just fight for survival. We fought for the idea that imperfection is power, that chaos is creation, that the cracks in us are where the light gets in. And if you take anything from that story, if you take one truth from the day the sky broke, let it be this: every time life declares war on you, every time the odds are stacked and the world expects you to fall, you have the right to change the rules. You have the right to fight back in your own way. Because somewhere deep inside you, in the quiet space where hope and anger meet, burns the same fire that once burned on Mars, the fire that whispers, we are human, we don't surrender. The Dominion believed in order, in control, in rules that made sense in their clean, logical universe. Their wars were like mathematics, predictable equations, clean victories, no surprises. They believed strength was measured in precision, in hierarchy, in the flawless obedience of machines. And when they looked at humanity, they saw chaos. A young species, disorganized, emotional, unrefined. They thought that made us weak. But chaos, that's our element. It's where we live. It's where we thrive. When the Dominion declared war, they expected humanity to fight the way they did, by the book, line by line, following the same patterns, the same logic. But humans don't follow rules. Not when it matters. We bend them, break them, twist them, and sometimes we write entirely new ones. And that's exactly what turned the war upside down. When their fleets jammed our satellites and shut down our communications, we didn't fall silent. We switched to jokes, to memes, to signals hidden in songs and video streams. Entire strategies were disguised in internet chaos, cat videos, pop songs, movie quotes. They couldn't decode it because it wasn't written for machines. It was written for people, for minds that thrive on madness, humor, and heart. That's the thing about us. When order breaks down, we don't freeze. We improvise, we adapt. Think about it in everyday life. How many times have you been told, this isn't how it's supposed to be done? How many times have you been scolded for taking the wrong path, for thinking differently, for doing it your way? That's the Dominion's mindset. Follow the rules, don't deviate, stay predictable. But progress never comes from obedience. It comes from the spark in someone's mind that whispers, what if there's another way? When you find a shortcut at work, when you fix something with whatever you have on hand, when you solve a problem everyone else gave up on, that's the same spirit that kept humanity alive when the sky was burning. The Dominion had their grand strategies, their centuries-old doctrines of warfare. Humanity had duct tape, caffeine, and sheer audacity. When their shields deflected our missiles, we didn't give up. We dropped tungsten rods from orbit, turning gravity itself into a weapon. When they tried to read our moves, we confused them with 1,000,000 different strategies from 1,000,000 different commanders who refused to follow orders exactly. And when their generals tried to open negotiations, demanding our surrender, humanity didn't send diplomats, we sent hackers. Hackers who hijacked the universal broadcast systems and rickrolled the Dominion Council with a 20th century pop song. It wasn't just rebellion. It was a statement. It said, you don't control us. You never will. That's the same defiance you can see in every ordinary person who refuses to let the world crush them. The single parent who works 3 jobs and still finds time to dream. The student who studies with a cracked phone and a broken laptop but refuses to quit. The artist who paints even when no one's watching. The athlete who trains in an empty gym after everyone else has gone home. Rules say, you can't. Humanity says, watch me. That attitude, that refusal to accept the limits others place on us, became our greatest weapon. The Dominion fought wars like they were games of chess, moving their perfect pieces with perfect precision. Humanity flipped the board, set it on fire, and used the smoke as cover. And that's what made us terrifying. Because the Dominion had no plan for chaos, no manual for madness. They couldn't understand a species that laughed in the middle of battle, that cracked jokes while dodging plasma fire, that turned fear into adrenaline and failure into innovation. They followed rules to survive. We broke them to win. In life, the same principle applies. The world often tells us to follow certain paths. Go to school, get the job, stay in line, don't take risks. But what if the path isn't right for you? What if you're not meant to walk it? The people who change the world are the ones who step off the road and build their own. The dreamers, the misfits, the rebels, the ones who make something new out of nothing. That's how we fight. That's how we live. When humanity stopped trying to play by the Dominion's rules, the universe changed. The aliens had no idea how to handle an enemy who didn't care about their codes of honor or their structured commands. They couldn't predict our next move because we couldn't either. And that was our secret weapon, unpredictability powered by passion. It's the same thing you see in every person who refuses to live inside a box, every inventor who builds something out of scrap, every student who teaches themselves what no one else would, every community that finds a way to survive despite the odds. We may not have had their technology, but we had something more powerful, creativity born from struggle, that wild, restless spark that says, if the world doesn't give me a way, I'll make one. And that's something no alien could ever understand. Because they had erased failure from their history. They had forgotten what it feels like to need to find a way. But humanity, we were raised by failure, forged in it. Every broken system, every collapsed empire, every mistake carved lessons into our bones. That's why when the Dominion came, we didn't break, we adapted. We learned, we improvised, we built new weapons, and we found humor in horror. Because that's what we do. We survive not just by fighting, but by changing the game. So when you face something in your life that feels too big, too impossible, when the rules seem stacked against you, remember what humanity did. Don't play by the rules that weren't made for you. Bend them, break them, write your own. Because the greatest victories don't come from perfection, they come from persistence, from daring, from that insane, beautiful human belief that no matter how impossible something seems, there's always another move. That's what saved us when the stars turned hostile, and it's what will save you when the world does the same. Because sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules. The Dominion couldn't understand us, not really. They had mapped our DNA, scanned our minds, studied our history, but they still didn't get what made humanity so unpredictable. They thought we were fragile, primitive, emotionally unstable. And in one sense, they were right. We are emotional. We feel deeply. We cry, we laugh, we love, we rage to them. That was weakness. But they didn't realize that our emotions are not chains. They are fuel. The Dominion's soldiers were bred without fear. They didn't feel pain the way we do. They didn't have anxiety or grief or hope. They believed this made them efficient, unstoppable. But there's a strange truth about emotion. It gives meaning to everything we do. Without fear, there's no courage. Without sadness, no joy. Without pain, no growth. When the Dominion invaded, they expected humans to crumble under fear, and for a while we did tremble. Whole cities hid underground. Families clung to each other, praying for the impossible. But then something changed. Fear became fire. That same fear that was supposed to break us turned into something stronger, determination. That's what we do, isn't it? In everyday life, when things go wrong, when the world turns against us, fear always shows up first. It whispers, you can't handle this. You're not enough. But the moment you decide to move anyway, the moment you take that first step despite the fear, it transforms. It becomes strength. It becomes focus. It becomes you deciding what fear means, not the other way around. That's what happened to humanity. We didn't erase fear, we weaponized it. Our soldiers fought knowing they might never see Earth again. Our engineers worked sleepless nights, haunted by doubt, but driven by love for the people they'd never meet. Our leaders cried in private, then stood tall in public. Every human felt fear and kept going. That's not weakness, that's power. The Dominion had no concept of this. Their soldiers moved like machines, obeying commands without hesitation. But when things went wrong, when plans broke down, they froze. They had no instinct, no emotion to guide them. Humanity, on the other hand, we thrive in chaos. We make decisions not because they're logical, but because they feel right. Because our hearts tell us to act, even when our minds scream that it's madness. That's the same courage you see in people every single day. The firefighter who runs into the flames, not because it's logical, but because someone might be alive in there. The parent who works 2 jobs so their children can have a better life. The young artist who keeps creating even when the world doesn't care. Those aren't acts of logic, they're acts of heart. And that heart, that raw, emotional, defiant heartbeat, became our greatest weapon in the war. When Dominion soldiers advanced in perfect formation, humans fought with chaos and passion. They shouted battle cries, told jokes over the radio, sang songs in the middle of combat. It confused the enemy. They didn't understand how laughter could echo across a battlefield, how people on the edge of death could smile. But that's what makes us human. When everything's falling apart, we find something to laugh about. When life is unbearable, we find beauty in it anyway. When we lose everything, we still find a reason to love. That's what the Dominion couldn't compute. How emotion could make us stronger instead of weaker. During one of the darkest moments of the war, when it seemed like the end was certain, a soldier broadcast a single line across all human frequencies: "Do not go gentle into that good night." It was an old poem, ancient, forgotten by time, but in that moment it became a call to arms. It reminded humanity that we don't fade quietly. We rage against the dying of the light. That's our story, not just in war, but in life. Think about it. Every time life knocks you down, every time you're heartbroken or lost, something inside you still refuses to disappear. That spark that says, "Not yet." That whisper that says, "I can still try again." That's the same force that carried humanity through the war. The Dominion fought with programming. Humanity fought with passion. The Dominion had strategy, we had soul. And here's the beautiful irony. Our flaws were our strength, our unpredictability, our emotions, our mistakes. Those are what made us impossible to conquer. Because emotions give birth to creativity, and creativity gives birth to miracles. The aliens could predict 1,000 possible outcomes, but they couldn't predict a mother building a bomb out of kitchen supplies to defend her family. They couldn't predict a musician rewriting a battle code through rhythm and melody. They couldn't predict humanity doing the impossible simply because someone said we couldn't. That's why we survived. Because we feel. Because we care. Because our emotions make us alive. So, when you think of emotion as weakness, remember humanity in that war. Remember how fear didn't destroy us, it became our fire. How grief didn't break us, it made us fight harder. How love didn't make us soft, it made us unstoppable. And maybe that's something to hold on to in your own life. When fear comes, use it. When you're heartbroken, grow from it. When you're angry, build with that energy. Because the same emotions that make you feel fragile are the ones that make you human. And being human is the most powerful thing in the universe. The Dominion had their armies, their logic, their technology, but we had something infinitely rarer. The ability to turn pain into purpose, to take every tear, every scream, every heartbreak, and make something out of it. That's the legacy of that war. That's what the aliens never understood. You can't control a species that finds strength in sorrow and hope in despair. You can't defeat people who see every ending as a new beginning. Because when you strip everything else away, when you take the weapons, the power, the numbers, what's left is the human spirit. And that spirit, fragile yet fierce, has a will that no empire can ever destroy. The Dominion looked into the eyes of humanity and saw tears. They thought it was weakness. They didn't realize it was warning, because those tears were not surrender. They were the calm before the storm. And when that storm came, it spoke not in logic or language, but in the oldest voice in the universe, the voice that says, "We feel, we love, we fight, we endure." That is humanity's gift. That is our weapon. And that is why, even when the stars themselves burn out, the echo of our laughter, our rage, and our love will still ripple through the dark. A reminder that emotion isn't our flaw. It's our power. The Dominion came to us with rules, cold, metallic, unbending rules. They had protocols for everything, for when to invade, how to conquer, how to dictate peace. To them, war was a tidy thing measured in strategy, mathematics, and expected outcomes. But when they declared war on humanity, they didn't understand that rules mean nothing when survival is at stake. Because when humanity fights for its existence, the game changes. The Dominion's rules were built on control. They believed every battle had boundaries. No attacks on non-combatants, no interference with planetary ecosystems, no emotional interference during combat. Order, logic, predictability. To them this was civilization, to us it was a cage. Humans don't fight for glory or conquest or reputation. We fight for something rawer, deeper, survival. We fight for our children, for the people we love, for the idea that tomorrow can still exist. That's what the Dominion never grasped. They thought we would play by their rules. But humanity doesn't play games where the stakes are our very souls. We rewrite them. When their fleets darkened our skies, our world became something new. Every city turned into a fortress, every mountain into a shield, every scrap of metal into a weapon. Humanity didn't ask permission, we didn't wait for orders. We just moved, instinctively, chaotically, fiercely. We stopped trying to fight like soldiers. We fought like survivors, and survival in its truest form doesn't follow rules. In the factories of Earth, workers welded armor through the night. In the ruins of cities, artists painted warnings on broken walls. Children carried messages across war zones. Scientists built weapons from fragments of old machines. Humanity became one living organism, desperate, beautiful, defiant. Think about that in the context of daily life. Because life itself often feels like war, doesn't it? The battles aren't fought with bullets, but with bills, deadlines, expectations, heartbreaks, and exhaustion. The world sets its own rules. Rules about who should succeed, who should stay quiet, who should dream, and who shouldn't. But the people who rise above aren't the ones who follow the system. They're the ones who refuse to be limited by it. That's what humanity did in that war. We didn't let the universe tell us what we could or couldn't do. We looked at the impossible and said, "Watch me." When the Dominion cut off our resources, we grew food in underground shelters. When they destroyed our satellites, we created networks using radio, light signals, even Morse code flashed from mountaintops. When they destroyed our fleets, we scavenged theirs. We didn't see failure as the end. We saw it as a beginning. That's what makes humanity unstoppable. That relentless refusal to stay broken. When everything falls apart, we don't stop. We pick up the pieces and build something new. Sometimes uglier, sometimes rougher, but ours. In daily life, that looks like the single mother raising her children alone, holding her family together when everything else has collapsed. It looks like the small business owner rebuilding after bankruptcy, the student starting again after failing, the patient learning to walk again after injury. Each of these people, each of these stories carries the same spirit that saved humanity, the spirit that says, "I may bend, but I will not break." The Dominion's rules told them to retreat when the cost grew too high. Humanity's rules said, "Keep fighting until there's nothing left to lose." And when you fight for survival, you don't care about perfect plans. You care about one thing, the next breath, the next heartbeat, the next chance. That's how humanity turned the tide, not through strategy, but through desperation transformed into determination. Every act of defiance, every torch lit in the dark, every scream of resistance, every heartbeat that refused to stop, became part of a rhythm the Dominion couldn't understand, a rhythm that said, "We will not go quietly." When you're pushed to your limits, something changes inside you. You stop asking for fairness. You stop asking for mercy. you start to realize that survival is not about following the path laid before you. It's about cutting your own. That's what the war taught us. When the world becomes cruel, when fate turns its back, humanity doesn't surrender. We adapt. That's why every asteroid became a weapon, every ocean a trap, every mind a strategist. We didn't wait for miracles. We became them. And it wasn't just soldiers on the front lines, it was everyone, the old and the young, the rich and the poor. People from every background, every belief, every corner of the planet, all united by one simple truth: existence itself was worth fighting for. That's what made the Dominion tremble. They saw a species that refused to die by their rules. A species that turned every defeat into fuel. A species that didn't need perfection, just purpose. And here's the thing, you don't need to fight an alien empire to understand that power. Every single person faces moments when life corners them, when all the rules collapse, when everything you thought was certain disappears, and in those moments, you have two choices: obey the fear that tells you to stop, or rise above it and make your own way. Humanity chose the second path, and that choice changed everything. When the war reached its breaking point, something extraordinary happened. Humanity stopped reacting to the Dominion. We started hunting them. We stopped playing defense. We started taking control of our story. That's the moment when survival transformed into dominance. When we stopped being the hunted and became the storm. That's a lesson that transcends war. In your life, there comes a time when you stop letting circumstances control you and start rewriting the script. When you stop waiting for things to get better and make them better. When you stop following the rules written by others and start building your own. That's what changing the rules truly means. It's not rebellion for the sake of chaos, it's evolution. It's saying, the old way doesn't work anymore, so I'll find a new one. The Dominion came to destroy us. Instead, they reminded us who we are. They forced us to rediscover that deep, ancient fire inside, the one that refuses to be extinguished. Because survival isn't about having everything you need. It's about using everything you have. And that's the heart of humanity. That's what the war proved. You can strip away our weapons, our comfort, our certainty, but you can never strip away our will to live, to adapt, to fight. The Dominion fought by the rules. Humanity became the rules. And that's why we're still here. The Dominion once ruled 700 worlds. Their flag was a symbol of control, of power so absolute that no one dared question it. Planets bowed without resistance. Species surrendered before the first shot was fired. Their history was one of conquest, written in the quiet obedience of the defeated. And then, for the first time in 1,000 years, they met a world that didn't kneel, a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, stubborn, defiant, loud. Humanity. At first, they couldn't even comprehend us. We weren't logical like they were. We didn't follow patterns or yield to fear or retreat when reason said we should. Every time they struck us down, we came back, faster, meaner, and smarter. Every time they thought they'd crushed us, we adapted. That was when the Dominion learned the truth. They hadn't started a war. They had started an evolution. We learned from them. Oh, we learned fast. Their weapons became ours. Their ships became templates for something smaller, sharper, more unpredictable. Their strategies became lessons we dissected and rebuilt. Humanity didn't just fight the Dominion. We studied them, absorbed them, and then became something they could no longer recognize. That's what makes this story more than just a war between species. It's the story of transformation, the kind that only happens when you've been pushed to the very edge and forced to find out what you're made of. It's what happens in life too. You face something that seems too big. Heartbreak, failure, loss, betrayal, and at first it feels like the end. But if you refuse to give up, if you keep learning from the pain instead of running from it, you don't just recover, you evolve. That's what humanity did. We turned every defeat into data, every scar into strategy, every loss into fuel. We became a new kind of species, one that refused to stay predictable. The Dominion's power came from structure. Humanity's strength came from chaos. They feared unpredictability. We lived in it. That's why we terrified them. Think about it. In daily life, the same principle applies. The world often tells you to be consistent, to follow a safe plan, to avoid mistakes. But mistakes are where growth lives. Every person who's ever done something extraordinary has walked through failure after failure, setback after setback, until one day they emerge not as who they were, but as who they became. That's evolution. That's how progress works. The Dominion had forgotten how to evolve. They'd stopped growing because they'd stopped struggling. But humans, we've been struggling since the dawn of time, against nature, against circumstance, against ourselves. It's written into us, that refusal to stop reaching higher even when we fall. When the war began, the Dominion thought they were facing a species of animals. When it ended, they realized they had awakened something else, something they couldn't categorize or control. Because we learned their language, their technology, their science. And then we surpassed them. We took their order and infused it with our chaos, their structure, and filled it with our imagination. And that's exactly what happens in life when you refuse to let hardship define you. You don't just recover. You come back different. You come back stronger. You come back with new eyes, new understanding, new fire. You stop being the same person you were before the pain. That's not loss. That's transformation. For the Dominion, the war was supposed to end with humanity's extinction. Instead, it ended with humanity's ascension. The hunters became the hunted. The rulers became the afraid. In their war academies, the Dominion began teaching new recruits one lesson: do not engage the Terrans. That was all they needed to say. Because now, our name meant something. It meant danger. It meant unpredictability. It meant that the most terrifying species in the galaxy wasn't the most powerful. It was the one that refused to die. Imagine that. A species once dismissed as primitive became the nightmare of empires. Not because of weapons, not because of numbers, but because of spirit. Because of the willingness to learn, to adapt, to change faster than anyone else could. That's the same power every person carries. Life knocks you down again and again. Every failure, every heartbreak, every disappointment. It feels like the end. But each one is teaching you something. Each one is shaping you into someone stronger. You might not see it in the moment, but every scar is a lesson written on your soul. Every wound is proof that you fought and survived. That's what humanity realized during the war. That pain isn't punishment. It's the raw material of growth. The Dominion had forgotten that truth. We rediscovered it. When they looked at us after the war, they didn't see the same species they had attacked. They saw something new, something unpredictable, impossible, and deeply human. We had taken their arrogance, their power, and their technology, and we'd added something they could never replicate: emotion, instinct, and defiance. They created weapons. We created legends. In life, you do the same thing when you turn your pain into art, your fear into drive, your heartbreak into wisdom. Every time you choose to grow instead of retreat, you're doing exactly what humanity did in that war, transforming your suffering into strength. The Dominion's empire still exists, but it's quieter now, humbled, because they learned something they'll never forget: that humanity doesn't just survive the impossible, we become something more because of it. And that's what we all must remember. When you're in the middle of your own battles, when the world feels cold, when everything's collapsing, that's not the end of your story. That's the forge. That's where your next self is being created. Humanity didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we refused to stay the same. The Dominion came to conquer, but they became our teachers. Unwilling ones, perhaps, but teachers all the same. They reminded us that struggle is the birthplace of strength. That fear is the first step to courage. That pain is not the enemy, stagnation is. And so the galaxy changed forever. Because in the aftermath of that war, a new truth echoed through the stars: the most dangerous species in existence is the one that learns from loss. That's what humanity became. And that's what you become, too. Every time life knocks you down and you stand back up, not as who you were, but as something greater. We stopped being the fragile blue planet. We became the storm. We became the warning whispered across the stars. And if you listen closely, that warning is the same whisper that echoes inside every human heart when faced with the impossible. A whisper that says, "I've fallen before. I've adapted before, and I will rise again. When the Dominion realized they were losing, they tried one last weapon, fear. Not the kind that explodes or burns, but the kind that crawls under your skin. They targeted our minds. Broadcasts filled the skies with their messages: surrender. Resistance is futile. Humanity is doomed. They thought that if they broke our spirit, our bodies would follow. But they didn't understand. Fear doesn't destroy humanity. It ignites it. See, fear is strange. It can make you run, or it can make you rise. It can freeze your blood or set your soul on fire. And in that moment, when every human heart was trembling, something incredible happened. We learned how to turn fear into fuel. It started quietly. A doctor in a bunker still tending to the wounded. A teacher gathering children and telling them stories about courage under candlelight. A soldier alone in the ruins of a city, whispering to himself, "Not yet, not today." These small acts, these flickers of light in the dark, began to connect until humanity's fear stopped being a weapon against us and became the rhythm of our defiance. That's the beauty of who we are. Fear doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. It reminds us what we have to lose, and that reminder becomes the reason we fight. The Dominion had no concept of that. To them, emotion was a flaw. But to us, it was the very thing that made us unstoppable. Think about your own life. How often does fear try to control you? Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of loss. It whispers, "Stay safe. Don't risk it. Don't try." It convinces you to play small, to avoid pain, to live inside invisible walls. But here's the truth: fear is not the enemy. It's the compass. It points to the very place where your growth lives. Every great story, every triumph, every breakthrough begins with fear. The first astronaut who stepped into the black unknown of space. The first inventor who dared to build something everyone said was impossible. The first person who said, "I love you," not knowing if they'd hear it back. Every single one of them felt fear, but they moved anyway. That's what separates those who live fully from those who merely survive. Not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. When humanity faced the Dominion's armies, every person felt fear. The soldiers on the front lines, the engineers building ships that might never return, the parents trying to shield their children from the sound of falling bombs. But they didn't let fear paralyze them. They carried it like a torch, because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is fear held in steady hands. And that's what we all must learn, to hold our fear, not hide from it, to let it teach us what we care about. You're afraid to fail because you care about succeeding. You're afraid to lose because you love deeply. You're afraid to be seen because you want to matter. That means your fear isn't weakness. It's proof that you want something more. When humanity stood together against extinction, we turned that fear into unity. People from every corner of Earth, languages, nations, beliefs, all trembling in the same way, all choosing to fight anyway. Because that's what fear does when it's shared. It becomes connection. It reminds us that we're not alone. That's the lesson the Dominion could never understand. They saw fear as chaos. We saw it as power. They tried to silence it. We let it roar. And in that roaring, humanity found something ancient, that primal heartbeat that's carried us through every impossible age. The same heartbeat that pushed us from caves to cities, from Earth to the stars. And that's the same heartbeat that lives in every person. When life hits you, when you lose someone, when your plans collapse, when everything you counted on disappears, fear shows up. It tells you the story is over. But it's lying. Because that's the exact moment when you have a choice to sink or to rise. To let fear consume you or to turn it into fire. Let's be honest, no one likes fear. It's uncomfortable, it hurts, it keeps you awake at night. But sometimes that's exactly what you need. Because comfort never built anything legendary. Comfort never sparked a revolution, never birthed an idea, never pushed anyone past their limits. Discomfort, fear. That's where transformation lives. When humanity was backed against the wall, we found a new way to fight, not with strength, but with spirit. People began to sing in shelters. Pilots painted names of loved ones on their ships. Soldiers carried photographs into battle. Those were not signs of weakness. They were symbols of everything we refused to lose. Fear told us what mattered most. and that's what gave us the will to protect it. In your own life, fear will always appear before something great, before a new job, a new dream, a new love, a new challenge. It will whisper, "You can't." And in that moment, you must remember what humanity remembered: we can. Because fear isn't the end of courage, it's the doorway to it. There's a saying that fits perfectly. A ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are built for. Humanity could have stayed safe, hidden, defeated. But that's not who we are. We were built for the storm. We were built to face the unknown. And you were too. When the war ended, the Dominion couldn't understand why they'd lost. They had better weapons, better numbers, better logic. But they never had what we had: fear that turned into fire. That's what changed everything. Because once a person learns to transform fear into drive, they become unstoppable. Once a species does that, they become eternal. So remember this in your own battles. Fear will always come. Let it look it in the eye. Because it's not there to stop you. It's there to shape you. To show you what you love, what you're made of, and what you're capable of becoming. The Dominion declared war, thinking fear would be their ally. Instead, it became ours. They gave us the very thing that made us invincible. Because in the end, fear didn't break humanity. It awakened us. And every time you face your own fear, every time you rise instead of retreat, you're doing the same thing humanity did when the stars burned and the sky fell. You're changing the rules. You're proving that courage isn't born in peace. It's born in fire. And like humanity, you'll find that once you learn to walk through fear, you never go back to who you were before. You become something greater, something unshakable. That's what saved us. That's what will save you. Because when fear comes for humanity, humanity doesn't bow, it rises. When the war was finally over, the Dominion's fleets lay shattered across the stars. What once looked like an invincible armada had been reduced to drifting wreckage, silent monuments to a truth they had never understood. Humanity hadn't just survived, we had evolved. The universe expected us to rebuild our cities, to mourn our dead, to retreat back into quiet existence. But that's not what we did. Humanity looked at the ashes of the war, at the scars on our world, and decided that this would not be our tragedy. It would be our beginning. Because that's what we do. We rise. Every time we're broken, every time we're beaten, every time the world tries to end us, we rise again, stronger, wiser, harder to kill. The Dominion called it irrational. We called it hope. Hope is humanity's most dangerous weapon. You can't see it, can't measure it, can't destroy it. It lives where logic fails, in the quiet belief that tomorrow can still be better than today. It's the spark that keeps the hands moving even when the body wants to collapse. It's the reason someone trapped in darkness still looks for a way out. And it's the reason, when the Dominion declared victory, humanity whispered, "Not yet." And hope doesn't mean ignoring the pain. It means seeing the pain and choosing to move forward anyway. After the war, Earth was a graveyard. Cities were rubble. Oceans glowed with radiation. The sky itself was wounded. But even then, people came out of their shelters and began to rebuild. Farmers turned craters into gardens. Engineers turned wreckage into homes. Children played among the ruins. That's what hope looks like, not blind optimism, but stubborn defiance in the face of despair. And that's something every single one of us lives through in smaller ways every day, because life at its core is a cycle of breaking and rebuilding. You lose a dream, a job, a relationship, a person, and for a while it feels like everything has ended. But then something small happens. You wake up one morning and feel the sun again. You take a breath that doesn't hurt as much. You try again. That's the spark. That's hope, quietly rebuilding you from the inside. Humanity has always been defined by that spark. It's why we crossed oceans, climbed mountains, reached space. Every step forward in our history came after a fall. Every triumph was born from chaos. That's why the Dominion could never destroy us. They could shatter our machines, burn our cities, crush our armies. But they could never kill that invisible thing that kept whispering, "We can still make it." The most powerful part of hope is that it spreads. During the war, there were stories, hundreds of them, of people saving each other when logic said they shouldn't. a pilot who flew back into enemy fire to rescue strangers, a group of civilians who refused to abandon an alien child they found in the ruins. Acts of kindness so small, so human, that they became weapons stronger than any fleet. That's what hope does. It reminds us that we're not fighting just for survival, but for meaning. And the same thing happens in life. When someone near you is broken, tired, defeated, ready to give up, your hope can become their strength. Sometimes, just believing in someone is enough to pull them back from the edge. That's how humanity rebuilt, not through technology, not through politics, but through connection, through the belief that together we could start again. Hope is a quiet kind of rebellion. It doesn't shout, it endures. When everything else gives way, hope is the voice that says, "Stand up one more time." That's what turned our defeat into victory. That's what turned our scars into symbols. When the Dominion looked at us after the war, they saw a mystery. How could a species so fragile keep rising from ruin? They studied our biology, our psychology, our history, but they never found the answer. Because hope isn't in the blood or the brain, it's in the will. It's in that unmeasurable part of being human that refuses to stop believing, even when the world demands you do. You've felt it too, haven't you? That moment when everything seems lost, when you're sitting alone, surrounded by silence, thinking you can't take another step. And yet somehow you do. You find just enough strength to move forward, even if it's only 1 inch. That's the same strength that rebuilt the world after the war. The same strength that has carried humanity through every age of fire and storm. And here's the truth. Hope isn't something you find. It's something you create. You build it with every small act of courage, every time you help someone else, every time you choose to try again when failure whispers in your ear. Hope isn't magic. It's effort, disguised as faith. When humanity looked at the stars after the war, we didn't see enemies anymore. We saw possibility. We realized that survival wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. We built new ships not for battle but for exploration. We reached out, not to conquer, but to connect. Because hope doesn't just rebuild what was lost, it builds something new. That's the greatest lesson humanity ever learned. Hope doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. It takes what broke you and turns it into fuel for creation. The same fire that burns can also forge. The same storm that destroys can also clear the way for growth. In your life, you'll face moments that feel like endings. Times when you think you've lost too much to ever recover. But remember what humanity remembered. That endings are often just disguised beginnings. That every ruin is a place where something new can grow. Hope is not the denial of despair. It's the decision to move through it. It's planting a seed in soil still wet with tears. It's smiling when your hands are still shaking. It's daring to believe that the story isn't over yet. When the Dominion finally withdrew, their last transmission wasn't a threat. It was a question. How did you win? And the answer, sent from a single human outpost, was simple. We'd believed we could. That's what hope sounds like. Quiet, defiant, unbreakable. And that's what you carry within you. The same force that rebuilt worlds lives in your heartbeat. The same resilience that carried humanity through fire can carry you through anything life throws your way. Because no matter how dark it gets, no matter how many times you fall, as long as you still have one spark left inside you, one breath, one thought, one heartbeat, there's hope. And hope, as the Dominion learned too late, is the one thing you can never conquer. Because hope doesn't just survive the impossible, it creates the impossible. And that's why humanity will never be defeated. Not by war, not by despair, not by anything. Because we don't just rebuild, we rise.